The wind screamed through the Bitterroot Mountains like a dying animal. Anna's boots were soaked in blood and snow. She knocked on the heavy oak door, bracing for the shotgun blast of a ruthless hermit. Instead, the heavy wood creaked open, and a gruff voice rumbled, "Come sit by the fire." The winter of 1,883 inches, the Idaho Territory, was not meant for the weak, and it certainly was not meant for a disgraced woman from Philadelphia in a ruined velvet riding dress. Anna Abernathy had spent the last 4 weeks learning exactly how cruel the frontier could be. She was 24, completely alone, and carrying nothing but a leather satchel and a desperate hope of finding her older brother Thomas. The mining town of Wallace lay miles below her, buried under a fresh foot of powder, but the cold of the snow was nothing compared to the ice in the eyes of the townsfolk. Anna had expected Western hospitality. Instead, she found doors slammed in her face. The local boarding house matron, a hard-faced Irish immigrant named Mrs. O'Rourke, had taken one look at Anna's torn clothes and the desperation in her eyes and barred the door. "We don't take in strays with trouble trailing behind 'em," she had sneered. At the livery stable, Old Man Higgins had been even less kind. When Anna asked for a horse to ride up the canyon toward the logging claims, he laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Ain't nobody up there but the wolves and Lucian Huckabee. And if the wolves don't tear you to shreds, Huckabee will. He don't take kindly to trespassers. Shot a Pinkerton man in the knee last spring just for stepping on his porch. You go up there, girlie. You're marching to your own funeral." But Anna had no choice. She was running from a scandal that had shattered her life back east, a broken engagement to William Sterling, a wealthy railway magnate who had framed her for theft when she discovered his illicit affairs. Disowned by her family, her only lifeline was Thomas, who had sent her a cryptic letter months ago mentioning a claim near the highest ridge of the Coeur d'Alenes. So, she climbed. For 6 hours, Anna fought her way up the treacherous, winding switchbacks of the mountain. The temperature plummeted as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, painting the snow in bruised shades of purple and gray. Every breath burned her lungs like inhaled glass. She had lost the feeling in her toes 2 hours ago. Now, her fingers were stiff, useless claws inside her thin leather gloves. The silence of the mountain was deafening, broken only by the whistling wind and the violent chattering of her own teeth. When she finally saw the cabin, it looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Built of massive, unpeeled pine logs, it sat backed against a sheer cliff face, a solitary plume of gray smoke rising from its stone chimney. Anna stumbled, falling to her knees in a snowdrift. She was so tired. The urge to simply close her eyes and let the snow claim her was overwhelming, a seductive whisper in her mind. But she forced herself up. She dragged her frozen body onto the heavy timber porch. Her hand, trembling and blue, curled into a fist. She knocked. It was a weak, pathetic sound against the thick wood. She expected the door to fly open. She expected the terrifying mountain man Higgins had warned her about to level a Winchester rifle at her chest and tell her to go die in the snow. She had been rejected by everyone, her family, her fiancé, the town of Wallace. Why should this wild, violent recluse be any different? She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the harsh curse, the sound of a gun hammer clicking back. The heavy iron latch scraped. The door swung inward with a low groan. Anna swayed, barely able to keep her head up. The man standing in the doorway blocked out the warm, orange light spilling from the hearth behind him. He was massive, built like the very mountains he inhabited. He wore a thick buffalo hide coat, and a rugged, untamed beard obscured the lower half of his face. His eyes, however, caught the firelight striking. Stormy gray eyes that swept over her shivering, broken form with intense, terrifying calculation. Anna opened her cracked lips to speak, to beg, to apologize for intruding, but her voice failed. A violent shiver racked her spine, and her knees finally gave out. Before she could hit the floorboards, a large, calloused hand caught her by the arm. The grip was shockingly strong, yet surprisingly steady. He didn't shove her away. He didn't raise a weapon. The mountain man stepped aside, pulling her gently into the overwhelming warmth of the cabin. "Come sit by the fire," he said. His voice was a low rumble, rough as tree bark, but entirely devoid of the malice she had anticipated. Anna stumbled past him, her boots dragging across the heavy bear rug that covered the floor. She collapsed onto a sturdy wooden chair positioned directly in front of a roaring stone fireplace. The heat hit her like a physical blow, causing her frozen skin to prickle with agonizing, burning pain. She gasped, curling into herself as the man quietly shut the door, sealing the howling blizzard outside. For a long time, the only sounds in the cabin were the crackling of the pine logs and Anna's ragged breathing. She sat huddled near the hearth, the snow melting off her dress and pooling on the floorboards. She watched the man warily out of the corner of her eye. Lucian Huckabee moved around his cabin with a quiet grace that belied his massive frame. He didn't pepper her with questions. He didn't demand to know her business. Instead, he went to a cast-iron stove, poured a steaming mug of black coffee, and brought it to her. "Drink," he commanded softly, holding it out. Anna reached for it, but her hands were shaking so violently she nearly dropped the heavy tin cup. Without a word, Lucian knelt beside her. He wrapped his large, scarred hands over her small, trembling ones, guiding the cup to her lips. The contact sent a strange jolt through Anna. His hands were incredibly warm, rough with calluses and scars, yet his touch was remarkably gentle. "Slowly," he murmured, his gray eyes locked on hers. "It'll burn you coming back to life." The coffee was bitter and strong, but it felt like liquid salvation sliding down her throat. As the heat began to thaw her core, the terrifying reality of her situation settled in. She was entirely at the mercy of a man who was rumored to be a killer. "They told me you would shoot me," Anna rasped, her voice hoarse and broken. Lucian stood, taking the empty cup from her hands. A grim, humorless smile touched the corners of his mouth beneath his beard. "Higgins talks too much down in the valley. I only shoot men who come looking for a fight. You look like you're just looking for a grave." "I'm looking for my brother," Anna said, sitting up a little straighter, trying to summon a dignity she didn't feel. "Thomas Abernathy." The moment the name left her lips, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted violently. The relaxed, quiet mountain man vanished. Lucian's jaw clenched, and his broad shoulders went rigid. He turned his back to her, staring into the flames of the hearth. "You're an Abernathy," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was a realization, heavy with dread. "Yes, I'm Anna. Do you know him?" "He wrote to me, said he had a claim near the ridge." "Thomas doesn't have a claim, Miss Abernathy," Lucian interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a hard, dangerous edge. He turned back to face her, the firelight casting long, ominous shadows across his rugged features. "Thomas has a death wish." Anna's heart pounded against her ribs. "What do you mean? Is he hurt?" Lucian sighed, running a hand over his face. He walked over to a heavy oak table and pulled out a chair, sinking into it. "Your brother didn't come to the Coeur d'Alenes to mine silver, Anna. He came to steal it. He crossed the Anaconda Copper Company. Worse, he crossed their chief enforcer, a man named Jeremiah Creighton. Creighton used to ride with the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. He's a tracker, and he's ruthless. Thomas stole a lockbox full of company scrip and deed transfers 3 weeks ago. He's been running ever since." Anna felt the blood drain from her face. No, Tommy wouldn't do that. He's a good man. Good men do desperate things out here," Lucian said softly, his eyes softening as he looked at her pale face. "He came through here a week ago, half-starved, riding a lame horse. I gave him supplies and told him to ride north to the Canadian border. If he kept moving, he might have made it." "Might have?" Anna whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The hope that had kept her alive on the grueling journey west was shattering into pieces. "Creighton is hunting him," Lucian explained, his tone serious. "And Creighton doesn't lose a trail. Which brings me to you, Miss Abernathy. You didn't just walk up this mountain. You left a trail a blind man could follow in the snow. If you were asking around Wallace for Thomas, Creighton knows about you by now. You didn't just walk into my cabin. You brought the devil right to my doorstep." Anna shrank back in her chair, the warmth of the fire suddenly feeling oppressive. I I didn't know. I swear to you, Mr. Huckabee, I have nowhere else to go. I'll leave. I'll go back out into the snow." She tried to stand, her legs shaking terribly, but Lucian was across the room in a flash, his hands gripping her shoulders, pressing her firmly but gently back into the chair. "Don't be a fool," he grunted. "You wouldn't make it a mile in this blizzard. You'd freeze to death before midnight. But you said I brought danger here." "I've lived with danger for 5 years, Anna. It's the only company I keep," Lucian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He looked down at her, his rugged face inches from hers. For a brief second, the walls he had built around himself seemed to crack. Anna saw a deep, agonizing loneliness in his gray eyes, a mirror to the profound isolation she felt in her own soul. Before either of them could speak again, a thunderous crash echoed through the cabin. It wasn't the wind. It was the heavy, deliberate sound of a booted foot kicking the solid oak door. Lucien's hands released her shoulders instantly. His demeanor transformed from a reluctant host to a lethal predator. He moved silently to the corner of the room, his hand wrapping around the cold steel barrel of a Winchester rifle leaning against the wall. He cocked the lever back with a sharp, terrifying clack. "Huckabee!" A voice roared from outside, cutting through the howling wind. It was a vicious, mocking voice. She's in there. Open this door or I'll burn you both out of that rat hole." Anna clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Lucian looked back at her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire that sent a chaotic mix of terror and electricity rushing through her veins. "Stay behind the hearth," the mountain man ordered, his voice devoid of fear. "And whatever happens, do not make a sound." The heavy oak door shuddered under another violent kick, raining dust and dried pine bark onto the floorboards. Outside, the wind howled as if cheering on the intruders. Anna scrambled backward, her breath catching in her throat as she pressed herself into the tight, shadowed alcove beside the stone chimney. Her heart hammered a frantic, sickening rhythm against her ribs. "Lucian!" Jeremiah Creighton's voice cut through the storm again, dripping with malicious amusement. "I know you're in there, you stubborn mule. I tracked the girl's dainty little footprints right up your ridge. Send her out, and maybe I'll forget you've been harboring a thief." Lucian Huckabee did not flinch. He stood in the center of the room, his massive shoulders squared, the Winchester rifle tucked firmly against his shoulder. His stormy gray eyes were locked on the thick wooden planks of the door. "Creighton," Lucian's voice boomed, deep and resonant, easily carrying over the shrieking wind. "You step foot on my porch, you're a dead man. You know I don't miss." A harsh, grating laugh echoed from the other side. "You always were a self-righteous bastard, Lucian. But I didn't come alone. I've got Miller and Hayes with me. You want to die over an Eastern runaway and a stolen lockbox? Open the damn door." Anna watched Lucian's jaw tighten. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They knew each other. This wasn't just a random bounty hunter. This was a man from Lucian's past. "Stay down," Lucian commanded Anna in a low, tight whisper, not taking his eyes off the door. Suddenly, the front window shattered. Glass exploded inward, sparkling like deadly ice in the firelight. A heavy, iron-barreled revolver shoved through the jagged frame, spitting fire and thunder into the cabin. The deafening roar of the gunshot made Anna scream, pressing her hands over her ears. The bullet tore through the air, burying itself into the log wall mere inches from Lucian's head. Lucian didn't hesitate. He pivoted smoothly, leveling his Winchester at the broken window, and fired. The sharp crack of the rifle was followed instantly by a choked gargle from outside. The revolver dropped onto the snowy sill, and the shadow in the window vanished. One down. "Hayes is dead, you son of a bitch," Creighton roared. Before Lucian could chamber another round, the front door gave way. A massive, iron-shod boot kicked the latch to splinters, and the door slammed inward, rebounding off the wall. The blizzard instantly invaded the cabin, a swirling vortex of blinding white snow and freezing air that caused the hearth flames to violently whip and sputter. Two figures charged through the threshold. The first was a stocky, desperate-looking man, Miller. Lucian swung the rifle, but Miller was fast, diving low and firing a wild shot from his pistol. The bullet grazed Lucian's thigh, tearing through the thick denim and drawing a sharp grunt of pain from the mountain man. Lucian pulled the trigger, catching Miller squarely in the chest. The man crumpled backward into the snowdrift on the porch. But the distraction was exactly what Jeremiah Creighton needed. Creighton lunged through the doorway like a rabid wolf. He was a tall, whipcord lean man with a scarred cheek and eyes as cold and lifeless as a frozen lake. He slammed into Lucian before the mountain man could work the lever of his rifle. The two massive men crashed to the floor, the impact shaking the entire cabin. The Winchester clattered away, sliding across the bloody floorboards. Anna watched in absolute terror as the two men brawled with savage, animalistic fury. Creighton delivered a brutal punch to Lucian's jaw, snapping the mountain man's head back. Lucian roared, shifting his weight and driving a heavy knee into Creighton's ribs, flipping the Pinkerton enforcer over. They rolled into the center of the room, crushing the heavy oak table and sending the tin coffee cups flying. "You should have stayed out of this, Huckabee," Creighton spat, blood speckling his teeth as he drew a long, vicious hunting knife from his belt. The blade caught the erratic firelight. "But now I get to put you in the ground, just like we did to those strikers in Colorado." Lucian caught Creighton's wrist, straining to keep the descending blade away from his throat. The muscles in Lucian's neck corded, his wounded leg slipping on the snow that had blown onto the floor. "I'm not that man anymore, Jeremiah," Lucian grunted through clenched teeth. "No, you're just a coward," Creighton snarled, bearing down with all his weight. Anna saw Lucian's arm trembling. The blade was inches from his eye. He was losing leverage. The man who had taken her in, who had offered her warmth and coffee while the rest of the world condemned her, was about to be slaughtered on his own floor. A sudden, unfamiliar heat surged through Anna's veins. It wasn't the warmth of the fire. It was pure, unadulterated rage. She was done running. She was done being a victim of cruel men. William Sterling had destroyed her reputation in Philadelphia, driving her into the wilderness. Mrs. O'Rourke and Higgins had left her to freeze. And now, this monster was trying to kill the only person who had shown her an ounce of mercy. Anna scrambled out of the alcove. Her eyes darted wildly and locked onto the heavy, cast-iron fire poker leaning against the stone hearth. She grabbed it, the blackened iron heavy and reassuring in her grip. She rushed forward. Creighton saw her movement out of the corner of his eye and laughed. A cruel, breathless sound. "Go ahead and run, little bird. William Sterling paid a premium for your head, and I intend to collect." The name hit Anna like a lightning bolt. Sterling. Her ex-fiancé. He hadn't just framed her. He had hired Pinkertons to hunt her down and silence her permanently. Thomas hadn't brought the danger to her. She had brought it to Thomas. "I'm not running," Anna breathed. She swung the heavy iron poker with every ounce of strength her exhausted, freezing body possessed. It connected with the side of Creighton's skull with a sickening crack. The enforcer's eyes rolled back. His grip on the knife slacked, and he slumped sideways, collapsing heavily onto the floorboards like a sack of grain. Lucian heaved the unconscious man off his chest, gasping for air. He sat up, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek, and looked up at Anna. She stood over the fallen Pinkerton, the iron poker still raised, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a fierce, untamed fire that rivaled the flames in the hearth. The mountain man stared at her, awe and profound respect dawning in his storm-gray eyes. "Remind me," Lucian panted, a rugged, breathless smirk touching his lips. "Never to get on your bad side, Miss Abernathy." The howling wind slowly began to die down as the midnight hour passed, giving way to an eerie, suffocating silence on the mountain. Inside the cabin, the heavy oak door had been propped back into place and barricaded with a heavy wooden dresser. Creighton was bound tightly to a structural beam in the corner with thick hemp rope, still unconscious and bleeding onto the floorboards. The bodies of his two men had been dragged out to the woodshed to freeze until the ground thawed enough to dig a grave. Anna knelt beside the hearth. A tin basin of water steamed furiously over the fire. She dipped a clean strip of cotton torn from the petticoat of her ruined dress into the boiling water, wringing it out with trembling hands. Lucian sat on a wooden stool beside her, his chest bare. The buffalo hide coat and bloody flannel shirt lay discarded on the floor. His torso was a map of old violence, faded white scars and deep ridges crisscrossed his muscular chest and arms, telling a silent story of a brutal past. But Anna's focus was on the fresh, bleeding groove along his outer thigh, where Miller's bullet had grazed him. "This is going to burn," Anna warned softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've had worse," Lucian grunted, his eyes fixed on the fire. She pressed the scalding cloth to his wound. Lucian's entire body tensed, the muscles in his arms cording like steel cables, but he didn't make a sound. Anna carefully cleaned the gunpowder and blood from the torn flesh, her movements remarkably gentle. As she worked, she could feel his steady, heavy gaze shifting from the flames to her face. "Creighton said you rode with him," Anna said, keeping her eyes focused on her task, though her heart was fluttering nervously in her chest. "In Colorado." Lucian let out a long, slow breath. "We were Pinkertons. Hired guns for the railroad and the mining barons. They sent us to break a silver miner strike in Leadville. The orders were to intimidate. But Creighton, he liked the killing. He ordered us to fire on a camp that had women and children in it." Lucian's jaw clenched, his voice dropping to a gravelly rasp. "I put my gun to Creighton's head, told my men to stand down, and I rode away. I've been hiding up here ever since. A ghost." Anna paused, looking up into his rugged face. The firelight cast deep shadows under his eyes, highlighting the profound, lingering guilt he carried. "You aren't a ghost, Lucian. You saved those people. And you saved me today." "You saved yourself, Anna," he corrected, his voice softening as he reached out. His large, calloused hand gently brushed a stray lock of soot-stained hair behind her ear. The touch sent a cascade of electricity down her spine. "Creighton," said William Sterling hired him. "Why does an Eastern Railway magnate want a woman dead in the Idaho Territory?" Anna dropped her gaze, wrapping a clean linen bandage securely around his thigh. "William and I were engaged. I thought he was a gentleman, but a month before the wedding I found his private ledgers. He was embezzling millions from his own investors and using it to buy up stolen deeds in the West, including Anaconda copper claims. When I confronted him, he turned the tables. He planted stolen jewelry in my quarters and told my family I was a thief and a hysteric. They disowned me. I fled west to find Thomas, hoping he could help me clear my name." She tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels, feeling the exhausting weight of her reality crashing down on her. "And now Thomas is running for his life because of me. Sterling must have realized I knew too much and sent Creighton to silence us both." Lucian stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up from the stool. He limped over to the far corner of the cabin, near his narrow cot. Kneeling down, he wedged a hunting knife between the floorboards and popped one loose. He reached into the dark space and pulled out a heavy, iron-bound lockbox. Anna gasped, recognizing the Anaconda copper seal stamped into the metal. The stolen scrip! Lucian brought the heavy box to the hearth and set it down between them. He pulled a small iron key from a leather cord around his neck and unlocked it. He popped the lid open. Inside were not just stacks of company scrip, but a thick, leather-bound ledger. "Your brother didn't steal this to get rich, Anna," Lucian said quietly. "When Thomas came through here a week ago, he was panicked. He said he had found the proof that William Sterling was illegally buying out Anaconda claims through shell companies. Thomas stole the box to get the ledger. He knew Creighton was tracking him, so he left the box with me to keep it safe." Anna stared at the ledger, tears welling in her eyes. "Thomas isn't a thief. He was trying to save me." "And he did," Lucian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thomas told me he was riding hard for the Canadian border to draw Creighton's men away from Wallace, so you could slip the chewhound unnoticed and find a lawyer. He's alive, Anna. Creighton stopped chasing him the moment he got word from Sterling that you were in the territory. You were the bigger threat." A sob broke through Anna's lips. The crushing guilt and terror she had carried for weeks finally shattered. She covered her face with her hands, weeping as the adrenaline left her body. Lucian didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees beside her, ignoring the burning pain in his leg, and pulled her into his arms. His embrace was like a fortress, warm, solid, and fiercely protective. Anna collapsed against his bare chest, burying her face in the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of pine, wood smoke, and sweat. "You're safe now," Lucian murmured into her hair, his strong arms wrapping around her trembling frame. "I swear to God, Anna, no one will ever touch you again." She pulled back slightly, looking up into his stormy gray eyes. The walls between them were completely gone, burned away by the violence and the truth they had shared. In his eyes, she didn't see a terrifying hermit or a hardened killer. She saw a man of honor, a man who understood the weight of betrayal and the desperate need for redemption. And Lucian looked at Anna not as a broken stray, but as a warrior, a woman who had braved a blizzard and fought a killer to protect him. The air between them grew thick, the heat of the fire paling in comparison to the sudden, undeniable pull drawing them together. Lucian's gaze dropped to her lips, his breathing growing shallow. Anna didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her heart pounding a new, exhilarating rhythm. Lucian cupped her cheek with his rough, scarred hand, and slowly, deliberately pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was desperate, bruising, and deeply tender all at once. It tasted of coffee, copper, and profound relief. Anna wrapped her arms around his thick neck, kissing him back with all the pent-up passion and longing she had buried away. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was alive. When they finally broke apart, the first pale rays of dawn were piercing through the shattered window, painting the snowy cabin floor in hues of gold and pink. The storm had passed. Lucian rested his forehead against hers, a genuine, breathtaking smile finally breaking through his rugged beard. "When the snow clears," Lucian whispered, his thumb tracing her jawline, "we'll take that ledger down to the federal marshal in Boise. We'll clear your name, and then—" "And then?" Anna asked, a hopeful, radiant smile touching her own lips. Lucian glanced around the bullet-riddled, blood-stained cabin, then looked back at her, his eyes shining with the promise of tomorrow. "Then maybe you'll come back up the mountain and sit by the fire for good." If you enjoyed this Wild West romance of betrayal, survival, and forbidden love in the snowy peaks of Idaho, don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this tale of Lucian and Anna with your fellow romance and Western drama lovers, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, heart-pounding historical stories every single week.
Hi, my name is William Sunny, the owner and manager of Iron Cowboy Gardena. After watching the video, she expected another rejection. Instead, the mountain man said, "Come sit by the fire. Child needed. I'd really like to know what you think." How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was how one moment of kindness completely changed Anna's path. After being judged, betrayed, and pushed away by almost everyone she trusted, she expected Lucian to treat her the same way. Instead, he gave her warmth, protection, and someone willing to stand beside her when things turned dangerous. I think the story quietly reminds us that compassion can sometimes reach people more deeply than we realize. Do you think Anna would have survived that winter without Lucian opening his door? And what moment made you realize Lucian was carrying his own pain too? In everyday life, we never fully know what someone has been through before they cross our path. A little patience and understanding can make a bigger difference than we expect. If this story meant something to you, feel free to leave a comment, like, or subscribe. I always enjoy hearing your thoughts and seeing which moments stayed with you the most.